Welcome to the Aviation Safety Community podcast, presented by the aviation safety community. This podcast follows a series of conversations with your host, Grenville Hudson, and field experts to discuss aviation safety, the latest trends, and industry insights.
Well, hello, it's Grenville Hudson from the aviation safety community, and we're here with another podcast. And with me today is Dr. Oleksandra Molloy from the University of New South Wales, where she's an aviation program coordinator and aviation safety lecturer. Welcome. How are you?
Hello, Grenville. It's a pleasure being here today and talking to you, and also for the audience that is listening today.
So, Oleksandra, we will be having you on the safety forums in the near future to talk about cognitive-based training to improve young operators' risk management. And perhaps you could give us a bit of a background on some of the things that you've been doing recently and in the past in the areas of this cognitive-based training.
That's a very interesting topic, and I really enjoy doing the research and talking about it, of course. But let me take you a little bit earlier in the days, how I got to this research interest that I have. Basically, this area is related to human factors, and of course it's related to education and training, and to a context of aviation and other high hazardous industries such as driving. And it's interesting that I've been always passionate about the education and training, as my mom is an educator, and every time coming back home, I used to listen to different teaching methodologies and about achievements of the students. So I think that really affected me in a way that I knew that I would like to be an educator and a teacher lecturer in the future. However, what wasn't clear at that time, particularly the industry and the context where to apply these skills. So I finished the humanities, and it was the Masters of Education and Linguistics, and I thought that that career will be the one for me. But I've been always looking for the challenges and basically trying to find the different areas in the research, and potentially I was doing the research degree with pilots, and particularly young novice pilots who were studying at the university, at the Aviation Academy. And one of my first topics for the research was examining the non-technical skills for future pilots at the universities. And that was very important and interesting topic, because when we go back in time, about 20 years ago, the topic of the human factors and the non-technical skills, particularly for forming at the academies, at the universities, was quite emerging, was at their early stages. And what happened when the pilots graduated, they had to complete various courses after the university to meet the requirement of the airlines, for example, like CRM training, of course, and human factors training, a number of other training that was required. But there was a bit of a gap there. There was a bit of a gap because the pilots at the time were not really prepared to implement some of the non-technical skills to the degree that was required. However, their technical part was quite excellent, because there was a lot of simulation training and, of course, all the academic courses to complement their degree. Anyway, there were these first steps back in my home country, Ukraine. And I started to look for further challenges in the human factors area and also non-technical skills for pilot training. And I came across quite an interesting human factors engineering degree in the University of Nottingham, where I continued doing my degree. However, it wasn't with pilots, it was with drivers. It was surprising at the time because I was really passionate about doing the training and non-technical skills for pilots without realizing that actually human factors discipline is such a broad discipline that can be applied to a number of different applications, not only to aviation, but also to other high hazardous areas such as driving and healthcare, and also defense and manufacturing and any other parts. Because in essence, it's a combination of psychology, engineering and design, and different aspects of human and machine interaction, which it was and is and will be quite topical in the coming days because of the development of all the new technologies. So we have to appreciate that. So going back to the cognitive-based training method, so we started looking at my research back in the UK about the development of some sort of training that may help to improve young drivers' behaviour, and I pursued my PhD here at University of New South Wales in Sydney, combining the area of education, aviation and drivers, because some of the novel techniques are coming from aviation, but they can be transferred to driving as well. And just generally when we talk about training cognitive skills, which is in simple words decision making and risk management, situation awareness and other, it's really transferable to different contexts. And when we talk specifically about training of young novice operators, it's maybe even more effective by applying different approaches for those.
Yeah. You've spoken about young drivers and reducing their behavioural, I guess, risks. How do you, well, first of all, I guess, how do you measure these sorts of things? How do you develop a training program around, these young people? And I guess it's applicable to young pilots too.
That's right. And that's a very interesting question. As an academic and as a researcher, of course, the first part is about doing that research and looking at the literature and the statistics. So what actually this tells us. So based on reviewing the statistics, for example, for young drivers, you can see where the major problems are and what are those contributing factors to contribute to the number of incidents and accidents at particular stage. So, for example, for the last 10 years or even more, one of the most risky behaviors for young drivers is speeding. So what it tells us that it is a problem. And there is a number of approaches that of course, road safety authorities and policymakers, researchers and industry partners are doing together to reduce this problem. However, it is about that collaboration. It is about that effort that people with their skills can contribute to. And as a researcher, what I and my colleagues can contribute is developing approaches, evidence-based approaches, and of course, based from the literature, and develop and design to a particular needs for young drivers to improve that particular aspect that leads to the risky behavior. And for example, we know that in science there is a concept of metacognition, which refers to that training that really reflects about own behavior, and sometimes it can reflect to another person's behavior. So there are some promises, there are some improvements in behavior, in particular training method for using this method. So it's then important to test in lab and also in the real-time environment, like on the road, whether what we can come up with in terms of training can be replicated and can have those improvements in behavior and in performance. For example, there may be a combination of a number of methods, but some of them show more promise and other less. Therefore, we continue focusing on that trend and, of course, the effectiveness that really works. So, and it's about that continuous process.
Yeah. So if we look at this research that you've done, could you give us an example of how you've actually identified a behavioural issue, and then what sort of training you would put in place to address that behavioural issue?
Yes, I can give you one example, and I can talk more in the upcoming speech. But
Yep.
Let's say lack of awareness about the speed during the drives. So that will be one example from the young drivers. So we found that while testing, just to understand their speed and behavior, some of the young drivers actually are not aware about their speed that they're driving, and they're not aware about speeding. So, and of course, another part is the perception, and that's individual perception, the social perception of what actually speeding is. And when you ask a question, when do you need to start driving in a particular speed based on the speed limit zone, before the speed limit sign, you like add the speed limit sign and after. So you will receive a number of answers, again, which highlight that even starting from some rules, from the driving rules about the speed limit and complying with the speed limit is already a problem. And there is a bit of influence, of course, from other, like from the social context and from other drivers. However, there is a bit of the individual drivers. And when we talk about lack of awareness, so when you provide one of the cognitive-based training called feedback, of course, feedback about performance, financial implications, and safety implications, you can see that even after 6 months, this training is effective because they reflect on their own performance and they can see that now they pay more attention. They are more aware about it. They're more aware about rules, about their speed, about what actually is perceived to be the norm and what the consequences. And I think those safety implications are very important to highlight, apart from, you know, just financial implications, and even the loss of license for some young drivers if exceeding the speed limit.
So in that situation, how did you actually determine that the drivers themselves were not aware of their speeds? How would you do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think there is a number of measures that we're looking at. Of course, I trust objective measures, but there is also that percentage of trust that is based on the surveys. So in terms of the objective data, of course, that will be the lab environment, for example. It will be a driving simulation. And on road, it's using actually an instrumented vehicle with a number of technology there to, of course, measure the speed and also to some biometric data like eye tracking glasses, where you actually can see where the participants looking at, whether they are looking at the speedometer, whether they are looking even the speed sign when they drive. And of course, we can argue that it may or it may not represent their behavior, or it may not represent exactly where whether or not they notice the speed that was driven, etc. So, but when you use these methods in combination, that it gives you a more comprehensive picture about it. So just imagine the numbers that you get from their recording device, or also from the biometric data and from perceived data, which is a survey. So when you put it together, it really tells you some story, and usually that story is really reflecting the statistics that we can see in terms of speeding and the contributing factors to incidents and accidents.
Yeah. And it strikes me that something that you said before, that a lot of this can be quite individual. So you could have peer pressure, I guess, where, you know, the thing is two-speed. And that's pretty common, I think, with young people. You know, can you identify this sort of thing, like the variation in the individual?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's actually one of the research that we've been recently doing with pilots in aviation, but also in driving. So it's also determining whether, for example, personality type has any particular, you know, a relation on acceptance of training or even to the risky behavior. Another part of the individual assessment is, of course, their individual perception of the risk management and also the different characteristics of the individual, right? So some people may measure risk to someone, you know, we measure risk is can be different in some situations than for different people. So individual differences are quite important, as well as the perceptions. And again, it comes to the point of experience. And we know that the more experienced the driver, the better the skills, and it's more improved particular behavior. But also when the novices are learning to drive and driving even on their P plates, they still are forming those habits that basically may predict that behavior. And to my mind, it just comes that theory of planned behavior, which really has a number of aspects that really show that it may predict the future behavior, and it has that component of the social norms as well, as we mentioned before. So really, I think again, in driving, but also in aviation and other industries. So there are so many different factors that affect, of course, an individual to perform in a particular way and to take the risk, or you know, that may lead to them more risky behaviors, like on the road, etc. So I think from like my perspective and from the research that I'm doing, so we are trying to develop some kind of training intervention and some practical component to that may be valuable for the policymakers or even for the licensing and the driver training in the future at some stage. And again, there are different research is going on around the world, of course, not only in Australia, and therefore it's always good to get together and share the experience and see what other countries like you know, US and UK and Netherlands are doing to reduce and to improve this problem. Because again, it's not just a problem in Australia or New Zealand, it's a little bit more than that, it's a worldwide problem.
Okay, yeah. So how do you put together delivery of the training to address these things that you would find?
So if I understand correctly, so the question is about how do I provide the training in the research? Or it's more,
yeah.
So there are different aspects, of course, that I'm considering, and we know that there may be different source of training, and this is also one of the variables that at some time I'm testing. So when I say the source of the training, it can be from a researcher like myself, it can be from technology. For example, it can be from app or particular technology in the car, so that's provide that. And of course, there are different implications. So, for example, some of the recent research that I've conducted showed that basically training provided from the researcher was effective in improving, short-term and even longer-term, up to 6 months, like that speed management behavior. And surprisingly, so there was an app developed by some state in Australia, and it was about, of course, reducing the speeding on the road to young drivers via the app. And what we found that it was actually not really effective in improving their speeding behavior, and in fact it actually increased their likelihood to speed, because that training that was provided from technology just was perceived as annoying because it was beeping all the time. So therefore there was more likely of rejection of that sort of intervention. So, and I think that's important to do different studies and different research to identify this, and just to see what works and what doesn't work. And it's fine if something doesn't, right? Therefore, same like with the training method that I'm trying to implement in the research, some of them works, but some of them don't, right? And that's a matter of continuous exploring and just see what can be effective longer term, of course. So, and I think it is challenging. It is challenging.
Yeah. In the area of, young pilots or just pilot training in general, where's the transfer been? What areas are you looking at in the flight side of things?
Yeah. So saying when we talk about trained cognitive skills for young novice operators, whether it's young pilots or young drivers, we are talking about the influencing, some of the cognitive skills, same like risk management, but it can be in different regards. It can be, decision making, supporting decision making, or raising awareness, of course, to be aware about particular components. So I think it's a matter of choosing some of the cognitive skills that are, again, problematic. So we would do the analysis. So for example, we've done the survey with young novice pilots and identified some potential areas that are problematic in terms of their skills and decision making, as well as risk management. For example, we are going to test shortly in our next study the effect of those cognitive-based training on a particular skill that we identified more challenging, like making decisions in particular situations. Normal operations, emergency operations, and again, different types of training may be more effective. In addition, we are planning also to implement new technologies and test, of course, biometric, which tells us subjective data, as well as implementing the VR training and even artificial intelligence. So I think that's basically where the future takes us, to test and implement technology, as well as, a human-based approach for the training, intervention that can be potentially used in the future training.
So this could also be pushed into airline training and that sort of thing, really, couldn't it? And the use of eye tracking technology in that, how important is that in all of this, do you think?
Eye tracking technology is quite important because it can tell us, again, additional objective data. So I believe that it can be used in isolation, so we cannot just rely on eye tracking and making assumptions about some results. It always needs to be done in a combination of another technique or two, in relation to another objective measure, as well as, perceived one. We can add, for example, like EEG, or we can add, another performance-based data, and we can use that. So, for example, there is, for example, a lot of, research or talks that eye tracking shows us that situation awareness. It may or it may not. We don't know. So therefore, we can't make strong conclusions just from one set of data, because it may be related to completely different components, and of course not to situation awareness. So sometimes, for example, we know that individual may notice some aspects even if not looking at in them, and therefore maybe in those particular cases it will not tell us about the understanding. However, on the other side, if the continuous research is conducted and implemented within a specific simulation, for example, or even in the live scenarios, it will be very, very effective because it shows us additional objective data, and it really can give us an understanding of the real situation and what's happening. So I think it is important, but it is also important to use it in addition with other measures.
Okay, so in that example you were giving, the situational awareness, what would be some of the other data that you might look at, do you think, that would be important?
So that will be, again, just validated methods to, of course, measure situational awareness developed by Micah Ansley and tools. So that has been validated in the past and really shows us the results. Again, in addition, it can be perceived situation awareness, which is subjective measure, but again, it can show us the part of the puzzle. And maybe like additional biometrical data that can really tells us about it. So so specific tools, additional tools, and the eye tracking.
Right. Yeah, no, that's quite interesting. And where do you see the future going with this cognitive based training? What's the future hold for us?
I believe that the future of the cognitive-based training really will be in we need more testing and we need more validation for a particular this training in different situations, different settings, before drawing a strong conclusion. Then this can be again implemented as an algorithm and adapted in the technology, like artificial intelligence based. For example, it can be a virtual coach. So from one research, we know that technology wasn't effective in delivering like feedback and training to improve speed management. However, another type of technology like that virtual coach, can be potentially effective, and in using that as a training technique in the beginning of the driving career, for example, will be quite useful. Another part, it can be again implementation of mandatory training as part of the driver licensing in the future for a particular category of young drivers, for example, for P plates. And I've been recently actually following the research from my colleagues and counterparts as well in other states, and what I found fascinating. So some of that, training-based program, for example, like we found that feedback about performance, financial, and safety implications is quite effective in improving young drivers' speed management behavior. And I just really seen a new coming research, the national one, about the trial deliver a population-based intervention to reduce young driver crashes, and this research really will be examining the effects of personalized safety feedback and financial incentives via the app for the next 6 months. So, and this research is going to be conducted across several states, and again, we have to have more validation, so where it will bring us. But we don't know what the results will be, but what we do know that we need to design the effective countermeasures and try to bring the numbers of incidents and accidents due to speeding or speed-related factors closer to zero.
Absolutely. Well, Oleksandra, this has been really very interesting information that you've provided us, and Well, I'm really looking forward to your presentation at the forum on how to improve young operators' risk management. It's, look, I think, even if we just think of the driving side of it, I think every family at some stage or another has been touched by road accidents and all that sort of thing. And yes, that's really important for us to understand that a lot better. But I think though, with what you're doing, taking that concept into the aviation side of things is going to prove to be very, very important in the future, especially as technology improves and as you say, we can have this integration of artificial intelligence in with systems and that. So look, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being part of this podcast, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. See you later.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. All the best.
Thank you for listening to the Aviation Safety Community Podcast. Please don't forget to visit our website, www.aviationsafetycommunity.com.au. We'll see you in the next episode.